Major General Giora Island, who is retired now, so a former general or a former someone who was in the IDF, has recently wrote an opinion piece, an op-ed in Ynet, and I think it's actually really interesting and would be pretty interesting to go through. I think he made a really good point at the start. I think he went a bit off a bit later, but I think it's still worth going through it. One for sort of recognizing that, in a sense, there are people that know what needs to be done, but also later, sort of, I think there is still a certain amount of lack of understanding of the Palestinian people to truly solve what or sort of to do what needs to happen. So yeah, welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valliant. James, I want to actually like read through the article so we can go point by point. But is there anything you'd like to say before we go in?
It's a very interesting article that uses backs up to a very ancient historical context, all the way from the Persians and the Greeks, all the way up to, Adolf Hitler and visiting Napoleon. But he makes, as a military strategist, he makes some very interesting points, even if you and I will have some disagreements about the current context with him. But he makes some very interesting points about the strategy and goal setting that should be part of rational warfare.
Okay, so let's go into the article. I'll put it in the live chat right now. It's also gonna be in the show notes in the description. So the title is Military Pressure is Not Enough to Win the War in Gaza. Opinion: Going to war without a discussion on the connection between war goals and the appropriate means to achieve them is a classic mistake throughout history, and it happened to us too. Three mistakes prevent us from achieving our objectives in the Gaza war. The first mistake is adopting the narrative invented by the Americans, which says that Hamas is identical to ISIS, i.e., a terrorist organization that imposed itself on the population. The correct narrative is that on October 7th, the state of Gaza launched a criminal war against the state of Israel. In wars between states, it is customary to exert economic pressure on the enemy state and even impose a siege on it. There is no obligation under international law to provide the enemy state with all its needs. At most, it is forbidden to prevent others, such as Egypt, for example, from providing food to the enemy. And this was pretty much what inspired me to actually do an episode on this, because this is pretty much as close as to what we've been saying for some time. I think, calling it out as this is not just, and it is something that Americans and sort of the Western world has been doing. It has been talking about Hamas as separate from the Palestinian population. Well, here the general talks about how the so-called, he puts it in quotes, the state of Gaza, because there is no real state like that, but the sort of the governorship of Gaza is what declared war on Israel. It's the and here is, I think, one step that should have been taken. It is the Palestinian people themselves. We are fighting the people as we did in World War II. We fought the Germans. We didn't fight the Wehrmacht or the Nazi party or the SS or whatever. We fought the people, we fought the nation, and that's what needed to be done to destroy it. And I think the narrative, because someone might be saying, why is it important? I think narratively, and what again, this humanitarian sort of expectation of Israel is coming from this separation. If if there is like a hostage situation in bank, you don't shoot through the hostages because they are also there. They are victims of the war or of the situation. You recognize that it's the bank robbers that have imposed on them that situation, and you try to control for it. In Gaza, Palestinian people have elected Hamas, have chosen to support Hamas, and have not stood up to Hamas since Hamas took over, and even since October 7th, when the war started, have still not done anything about. Yet the expectation is still the separation. And I think calling out the narrative is really important to actually fighting the war. James?
I totally agree. We have totally misdiagnosed. America and Western nations, in effect, look at this as Hamas is completely different from the Palestinian population in Gaza. No, the Palestinian population in Gaza elected Hamas their political leaders. In a sense, it was a state of Gaza, as he describes. Now, it didn't have all the bells and whistles and wasn't recognized as a government, and they didn't do much to create a peaceful, prosperous place for their people to live, as governments ought to. But nonetheless, there is no separation between the Gazan population and Hamas. We've mentioned many times how it is civilians who, quote, civilians who have been active in hiding the hostages. There were civilians who crossed over and helped the paratroopers who were gliding into attack on October 7th. There were people who came over the fence. There is no resistance against Hamas. Use the World War II example. There's no French resistance. There's no Polish resistance. There was even a German resistance that tried to kill Hitler more than once. So there's no resistance. And as we saw in World War II, the major countries had a resistance to Nazi invasion and occupation. There is no such resistance against Hamas in Gaza. Full stop. And so we have to treat them as one, and we have to separate that. We do everything in our power to let the population know that their loyalty to Hamas will kill them. Yes.
Yeah, and even strategically, again, when it came to World War II resistance, there was the sort of the partisans were a big part of, fighting against the Nazi regime. I know that the Yugoslav resistance, and there were a bunch of communists for the most part, but they forced the Germans to have, I think, upwards of hundreds of thousands of troops actively in the region they've already conquered because of the resistance. So if there was any resistance in Gaza, helping the IDF, helping make sure that Hamas, doesn't, because of the way IDF, one is sort of expected to act and also does act by itself, that it doesn't completely root out like a certain area. So it has to go up and down like every few months again, because Hamas resurfaces again and again, because there is no resistance coming from the Palestinian population to Hamas. They are not trying to get rid of Hamas. And that
Right.
plays a big part. And I think
Whatever we
the
think of the czars, whatever we think of the communists, both Napoleon and Hitler, as the officer mentions in this article, made a big mistake when they invaded Russia. They thought that military superiority alone could do it. It could not when you have a Russian population willing to move out of the area, willing to starve them, willing to suffer to push out the foreign invader. And take advantage of the large land mass and the harsh winters. And military superiority is not necessarily going to give you your long-term strategic goal of being able to occupy any part of Russia, Napoleon or Hitler. Your thinking there on goals was completely out of whack and almost doomed from the start.
Let's continue further. The second mistake is not exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. The purpose of war is to force the other side to act against its will. There are three main ways to take the ground out from under the feet of dictators. Israel has not tried to use any of these methods, and let's go one by one. The first method is apply economic sanctions that will cause the formation of an angry, bitter, and hungry crowd. Dictators are especially afraid of this situation, as demonstrated in the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Arab Spring, and most recently in Syria. I mean, yeah, that should be an absolutely duh sort of response. The fact that in a sense,
How cruel you're saying. Daniel, ordinary people, mothers and children should be starved. There should be economic pressure. There should be insecurity on the part of this, quote, civilian population. Yes, yes, you're damn right. That is what we've been saying now for well more than a year, that we should cause a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There's only one way to separate the population from their leadership, to show them just how deadly their leadership is, how much mortality their leadership is causing them. Yeah, and does it sound to the altruistic ears of people in the West who have this fantasy notion that the Palestinian population is somehow ideologically separate from Hamas? They're not. They're absolutely not. We have to punish the population that is supporting Hamas. They're part of Hamas's war engine. Absolutely. And the only way to create some kind of light between the population and Hamas is to show the population that they suffer and they will starve under Hamas leadership. That is a correct tactic of war. It's, as I've said many times, it's a tactic of war that's been used since the dawn of civilization. Siege warfare. That's the only way to go about this if you want a long-term solution, if you want there to be any daylight between the population and their monstrous rulers. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's two parts of it. One is making sure that people who support Hamas feel the actual consequences of supporting Hamas.
Right.
Similar to and and the second part is that the people who the so-called apoliticals, or the people who just don't care about politics, just don't care what's going on. And now I'm referring to more on the reality show. We'll talk about the recent Lex Friedman Zelensky interview. And one thing Zelensky called out is the Russians who don't really think about what's going on. It's important to remember you are also guilty. If your government is doing something and you sort of look the other way, when I mean, even go to, on like personal grounds, if you see something is happening and you turn the other way, you see, well, that's not me, it's not happening to me, it's not about me. That is, you are also guilty. You are trying to evade what is going on, and by sanctions, now specifically to Russia, for example, by embargo, complete embargo on Gaza, not providing them with actual food, with humanitarian aid throughout war, it will make them know this is what's going on. You are providing support to Hamas. You are sustaining Hamas. You are making sure that Hamas is able to continue fighting. If you want to stop that, if you want to embrace life, if you want to live in the Western world, if you want to do anything good with your life, you need to stand up. It cannot be expected that you can support Hamas, or you can be sort of neutral to Hamas, and there will be no consequences for those decisions, for those actions, for those beliefs.
In fact, by not starving them out, by continuing to have any kind of trade interaction with Russia, by not creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, what you're doing is you're telling the world that there's a moral sanction on the other side. You know, Donald Trump said something outrageous about Ukraine the other day. I think it was just yesterday. He said that the considering Ukraine for membership in NATO gave Russia a valid justification for invading. No, membership in NATO is no valid. It was no aggressive threat to Russia at all, nor could it have been conceived such. But you see, even by continuing to negotiate or trade at all with Russia, which has a complex economy, what you're doing is you're saying, well, you see, you've got a moral sanction there. There was a justification for what you did. Now, in Gaza, consider that. So long as you continue to feed the people who are holding hostages actively right now, what you're doing is you're saying, well, there's a moral justification for everything Hamas has done. It's not just that you're the existential circumstance of starving them to create an immediate crisis that alienates them from their leadership, but it's also the moral sanction that you're giving, which I think is at least as important quality. It could be a temporary thing if someone's just simply starving for the moment. Oh yeah, uncle, now feed me. No, what you have to say is, no, you are wrong. And we will not allow any food in that we can help into Gaza so long as you guys have this attitude and are supporting Hamas. In other words, not only won't we feed you now, you could expect to starve so long as you hold these attitudes and have Hamas as your leaders.
Yeah, we'll talk about Russia later on
Yeah,
the
I'm sorry.
TRS, so I won't. No, it's okay. I just won't comment on it further, just so we can cover this. So continuing, the second method is to support an alternative government. Israel has blocked every initiative that would have led to such an alternative. Now, here I might disagree based on what it means. The fact is, yeah, there is still no plan after. There is still no plan what will happen with Gaza after. Netanyahu has straight up refused to commit to anything. Now, if the alternative government includes Israel will occupy Gaza, then yeah, I think something like that. I've been sort of wrestling with. I think if Israelis were united about what needs to happen, then Netanyahu 100% should have said, there is no other solution. We have to occupy Gaza. We've been proven again and again that anytime they are giving any sort of self-governance, anytime they are giving autonomy, or even anytime they are even part of another nation, they will attack us. There is no other solution than occupation.
Do
But
we know
if
of any political movement among the Palestinians that it would be friendly to Israel? Oh no, let's make it even simpler. Neutral and non-hostile. They don't have to be cheerleaders for Israel in the United States, but how about someone who's just neutral on the subject of Israel? Is there any such Palestinian movement? Not the Palestinian Authority doesn't even qualify in my mind as that. So what kind of a alternative political leadership is even possible there? So I'm afraid I have to agree with you. Only an outright occupation could even create a context in which we could separate out Palestinians, or there could even be and without that first step, making it clear to the Palestinian people they will suffer so long as they have these ideas and these leaders, you're not going to even create an alternative that's viable. And so, under those circumstances, it's more like Japan during World War II. You simply have to occupy it and say you're going to occupy the entire country for as long as it takes until this situation changes. Yeah.
Continuing further, the third method is to make the enemy fear losing territory, a strategy that we have refrained from trying. Without any discussion, Israel decided that only military pressure will achieve the goals of the war. This determination was a serious error, since military pressure is the strategy that Hamas has been preparing for these past 15 years. Now here I'm a bit more. I think this is sort of part of the second part, basically saying, yeah, we will take land, we will annex parts of it. I mean, I think in this regard again, I would 100%. And there is,
We're here to
yeah,
stay, and we're going to be here as long as it takes until you all change your attitude and develop on your own a new leadership. That's the way it
yeah,
has to be.
and there is some when it comes to, and now I cannot remember what it is called, the corridor between Egypt and Gaza border. I think that
Philadelphia,
was, sorry.
yeah, the Philadelphia,
Philadelphia corridor
right,
has been, and also then separately, I think Netzarim corridor, which goes through the middle of Gaza. I think
right.
those have sort of can be viewed in a similar way, but they haven't been in any way made as permanent as like this. This is just how it's gonna be. I
It's
think
quite
some,
obvious that the border with Egypt needs to be permanently occupied by Israel, at least indefinitely
yeah,
occupied by
and it
Israel
needs
as
to
of
be
now,
stated out
right?
loud. It needs
Right?
to be stated out loud. It needs
They
to be
say it
said.
out loud. There will be no border that the IDF does not control between Gaza and Egypt. Full stop. That's what must be as a minimum. And I'm no military genius. I'm not an expert in this sort of thing. And yet it seems obvious to me that if the point one, starve them out, siege warfare is going to work, you've got to control the entire border between Gaza and Egypt. And that means Israel indefinitely setting up camp right there with the IDF. Yeah, maybe even permanently occupying it, making it part permanently of Israel, so that there is no way for Hamas to get weapons and support from Iran or their other friends. Yeah,
Continuing further, the third mistake is the failure to initiate political dialogue. Immediately after the massacre, during US President Joe Biden's visit to Israel, the Israeli Prime Minister was asked to answer just one question: what will happen to Gaza the day after? Netanyahu replied insultingly, "When we get to the day after, we will talk about the day after." He would have been better off explaining that Israel has no territorial or political interest in Gaza, but only a security interest, which means ensuing the complete demilitarization of Gaza for years. Israel is therefore ready to discuss here and now with any Arab country and any Western country about the future government in Gaza. Any proposal that can convince us that Gaza will be demilitarized will be acceptable to us. And now jumping between sort of two things. On one hand, in a sense, yes, Israel has no like basically they don't look forward to occupying Gaza. It's no one wants to take control of Gaza. The population is incredibly radicalized. Egypt wouldn't want to take control of Gaza because of how radicalized, how crazy really the people there are. No one wants to do that. But sort of
And I wouldn't trust the
yeah,
Saudi kingdom, the Jordanian kingdom. They don't have any government in Syria right now, or Egypt. So no, I have to say that asking
yeah,
Arab
and I
nations,
think just to add, one thing that would require for this to be said would be recognition from Western governments that Palestinian people are the problem, that something went wrong here and we need to correct it. As long as you don't have that guarantee, that recognition from the West, it's pointless saying that you will be able to give it to someone else, or you will allow someone else to recognize it. When the problem is not recognized, you cannot go looking for a solution. When the Western world doesn't
right,
recognize that the Palestinian people are the problem, that
right.
something went insanely wrong here, then there is you can never sort of find understand or sort of like mutually or a solution that would benefit Israel, that would make sure that Israelis are not under fear of attacks from the Palestinian people every single day. And the fact is that the Western governments don't recognize it. They still view Israel as the problem here. They still view that the yeah, it's similar to Trump's point about NATO. It's the fact that Israel is the free nation in the Middle East. That's the problem for the Palestinian people. It's nothing. It's no occupation. It's no so-called apartheid. It's no genocide. It's the fact that there are free Israelis living in close proximity to them.
I think part of the model for the author here is the occupation of Germany after World War II. No, we should not have been allied with the Soviet Union, and there should not have been a Soviet sector. But Germany was divided up in the wake of World War II into a British sector, an American sector, even a French sector, I think, and a Russian sector. That is to say, international governments. And wouldn't it be delightful if international governments recognized the problem and you had governments like the United States and Great Britain saying, yes, we'll help you in your control of this out of control war causing population. Yeah. And so that wouldn't it be delightful if there was international cooperation in an occupation of Gaza? That would help signal that, Israel, look, never wanted to rule this area, and we don't want to have to be the sole governors of this unruly population that hates us in a religious, racist, violent way. Outsiders coming in to help with the occupation would take care of part of the moral sanction issue and make it clear that, look, the peace-loving, rights-respecting nations of the world are here to stay until you guys get your act together and renounce violence and at least become neutral on the idea of Israel's existence rather than overtly hostile to Israel. Yeah, that's the way it would be. Wouldn't it be lovely if the world got their act together and realized who the good guys and bad guys were here? But that's what it would take. It would take the same kind of moral confidence we had against the Nazis. We need to denazify, the former territories known as Prussia and Bavaria because they're loaded with Nazis. And so, guess what? The United States government is going to take charge of this area until it is denazified. Yeah, wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah, I mean, just look at the southern Lebanon after 2006. There was a UNIFIL force there whose, at the very least, sole responsibility or sort of responsibility should be to make sure Hezbollah is north of the Litani River, is no longer in the south. They stayed there until Israel kicked out Hezbollah from the south. Israel had to do it. Again, if there was a recognition from the UN, Jesus, imagine that. If there was a recognition from the UN that UNRWA has failed, that Palestinian population has been radicalized towards killing Jews as the only goal they have, and now we have to solve it. Now we have to find a solution for that. Then we could talk about someone else, some international body taking care of Gaza. But there is zero
Zero.
sort of recognition, even of what's happening. Again, this is not even about the West not wanting to solve this. The West doesn't even recognize that there is a problem here. You
Right.
can you, you can never find a solution
Look, it was the
without
UN that
even.
said that Hezbollah could not operate south of the Netanya River. But for how many years did Hezbollah operate militarily south of the river? I mean, even their own international or UNRWA. You say UNRWA? No, UNRWA was encouraging. UNRWA was an active participant in educating the Palestinians in Gaza to their murderous ways. So the United Nations and the international community has been far from recognizing the problem, the actual problem. They've been on the other side. They've been on the other side. There's no other way of looking at it. So in this upside down world in which the United Nations is overtly supporting the enemies of Israel, we are many, many, many kilometers away. Uh, One might almost say light years away from the context that he's talking about there, where he invites international groups to come in and help with the occupation to help solve the problem. Wouldn't that be lovely? But unfortunately, the international community is exactly the opposite in its attitude and position than it was, say, with Nazi Germany at the end of World War II.
We have a super chat from Jeff. Thank you so much, and a super chat from Bonnie. So we didn't go through the whole article. He later on goes on to bring some examples from history. Again, as I mentioned, the link to the article is going to be in the description, so you can check it out for yourself. But we have the reality show coming up. So James, any last thoughts on this?
Well, at least we have a military expert willing to say out loud that we need to engage in the classic war tactics when you're engaged in war. It's a siege that you need to do. You need to starve them out. You need to get the population to suffer. Until and unless you do that, you should expect no alienation between the population at all and Hamas. Indeed, as we just said, the international organizations like UNRWA have been doing nothing but feeding that hate, putting gasoline on the fire of the connection between the population and Hamas, and giving them moral sanction. So we are unfortunately far from having a rational attitude about war. And in some ways, this article did express a more rational attitude about war, at least in a couple of respects. But we're far, far from that context, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we discussed Russia and points about Russia and Ukraine a little bit. We'll actually be talking about that on the reality show, where we'll go through the recent interview with President Zelensky of Ukraine and Lex Friedman. I think it's definitely something worth watching. So make sure to link is in the chat for the reality show. Make sure to check out that. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll be back in just about a minute or so on the reality show. Thank you again, and bye bye.
Be safe.